The hum of the industrial floor polisher was Denise Atwater's constant companion, a low, rhythmic drone that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past 13 years. Most people at Hallberg International, a behemoth in global logistics, didn't even register the cleaning crew. Not out of malice, she knew, but out of habit. They were the silent architects of order, the invisible hands that swept away the chaos of the day, blending into the background like the building's own climate control system. Denise had perfected the art of being unseen, her movements efficient, her gaze steady, her mind a quiet universe of its own. It was a brisk Monday morning in downtown Fort Worth, Texas, and the company's main lobby buzzed with the usual symphony of ambition, shoes clacking against polished tile, fingers tapping on phones, hushed conversations about deadlines, and the universal clutch of coffee cups as if the liquid inside held the secrets to corporate salvation. Jonathan Kellerman, the CEO of Hallberg, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation in global trade, was halfway through his customary walk from the parking garage to the 18th floor executive suite when a sound sliced through the familiar din, stopping him cold. A voice. Not just any voice, but one that was fluid, sharp, and rolling through a language he hadn't heard spoken with such native precision since his last high-stakes negotiation in the company's bustling Shanghai office. Mandarin. He paused, scanning the bustling lobby. Perhaps one of the international sales representatives had come in early, catching a quick call before the day began. But then he saw her. Denise. She stood near the sleek, touchscreen lobby directory, a splash of burgundy in her janitor's uniform against the muted tones of the corporate space. Her short, neat twists were pulled back into a practical ponytail. She was mid-conversation with an older man in a navy jacket and thick-rimmed glasses who looked a mix of bewildered and immensely relieved. Denise was gesturing calmly, her voice warm yet firm, directing him toward the elevators. The Mandarin flowed from her lips, not just words, but inflections, nuances, the subtle shifts in tone that only a true speaker could master. Kellerman narrowed his eyes. He'd seen her countless times. Passing through the halls after late meetings, a fleeting presence in the periphery, always polite, always quiet, never making eye contact unless directly addressed. He didn't even know her name. But here she was, effortlessly translating and explaining complex building logistics in a language that most Americans couldn't even pronounce correctly, let alone understand. A flicker of something, surprise, then curiosity, then a deeper, unnameable feeling, stirred within him. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, drawn by an invisible thread. As he drew closer, she smoothly wrapped up the Mandarin conversation, offering a polite nod to the relieved man before turning to a delivery driver struggling with a heavy clipboard and a stack of mislabeled boxes. Necesito que la entrega se dirija al cuarto de almacenamiento B, por favor. Los documentos de aduana están en la carpeta azul, no en la roja, señor *, she said, her voice now a smooth, confident stream of Spanish. The delivery man blinked, his brow unfurrowing as understanding dawned. Sí, gracias. Muchas gracias *, he stammered, visibly grateful. Just as casually, Denise turned her attention to a vendor standing nearby, looking utterly lost amidst a set of crates marked for different departments. C'est marqué pour la salle de conférence B, pas le lot de la logistique. Le code est sur le côté, monsieur *, she explained in flawless French, pointing with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Kellerman's jaw clenched, not from anger, but from a tightening knot of something else. A sharp, uncomfortable pinch of guilt. He'd spent over 2 decades in global logistics, spearheaded international expansions, hired an army of translators, and built cross-cultural training programs that cost the company millions. Yet here, in his own building, the most linguistically gifted person he'd encountered in months, perhaps years, had been scrubbing toilets and mopping floors just 2 floors below his opulent executive suite. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He stepped forward, his voice more curious than commanding. Excuse me. She turned, startled but composed, her expression shifting from focused assistance to quiet deference. Yes, sir? He offered a faint smile. That was Mandarin, right? Yes, sir. You speak it fluently? Yes. And Spanish? French? She nodded, a subtle tilt of her head. Also Portuguese, German, Arabic, Italian, Swahili. And I read Latin, but I don't really count that. Kellerman blinked. He felt a sudden, dizzying sense of disorientation. You're telling me you speak 9 languages? Yes, sir. There was no pride in her tone, no arrogance, just simple, undeniable truth. Straight as a level beam. He stared at her for a second, trying to reconcile the image of a quiet, uniformed janitor with the reality of a walking United Nations. "What's your name?" he asked finally, the question feeling almost absurdly trivial given the revelation. "Denise Atwater." "Miss Atwater, are you free for a few minutes?" Her brow raised slightly, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Now?" "Yes. I'd like to talk to you in my office." He noticed the slight hesitation in her posture. Not fear, exactly, but that built-in reflex people develop when they're accustomed to being ignored or underestimated, a quiet skepticism of unexpected attention. She slowly nodded. "All right?" He pressed the elevator button, holding the door open as she stepped inside. The ascent to the executive floor was silent, a stark contrast to the buzzing lobby below. Inside the lift, a heavy quiet settled. "I've worked here for 13 years, she said suddenly, her voice soft, barely above a whisper as they rose. Kellerman turned towards her. "Never thought I'd be invited up." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. He returned it, a small, quiet curve of his own. "You might be surprised how quickly things can change." He said the words, but he had no idea just how much was about to change. Not just for her, but for him and for the entire company. The elevator chimed, a soft, polite ding, and the doors opened onto the executive floor. Denise stepped out first, her work shoes quiet on the polished darkwood floor of the executive hallway. The air here smelled different, a blend of citrus and expensive leather. Money if you had to put a cent on it. Kellerman's assistant, a perpetually calm woman named Sarah, glanced up, her eyes wide with undisguised surprise at the sight of Denise beside him. He didn't offer an explanation, just a curt nod for Sarah to let them pass. Once inside the glass-walled office, Kellerman gestured to a plush leather chair across from his expansive desk. "Please sit." She sat carefully, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes moving slowly across the room. She wasn't impressed, merely observant. A large, intricately detailed world map hung behind his desk, each country dotted with colored pins, representing Hallberg's global footprint. On the side table, a tray of gleaming espresso cups, a framed photo of his 2 daughters, and a slightly dusty award from a long-forgotten trade conference in Brussels. Kellerman sat across from her, leaning forward slightly, his gaze earnest. "So, Denise, I'm going to be honest. I didn't expect to have this conversation today. Or ever, for that matter." She gave a small nod, her posture still, her face unreadable. "But I just heard you speak 3 languages like you were flipping light switches. And I need to understand, how does someone with your gifts end up working here, cleaning floors?" For a second, she didn't answer. Her eyes flicked toward the panoramic window, then back to him, a flicker of something guarded in their depths. "You got time for the truth?" she asked, her voice low. "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." She sighed, a soft expulsion of air. "All right then." She rubbed her palms together, a small, unconscious gesture, as if warming up the words before releasing them. "I was born in Toledo, Ohio. Only child. My dad was a pipe fitter, my mom a nurse's aide. They didn't have much, but they worked hard. Pushed education like it was religion. Said it was the only way out." She paused, her gaze distant, lost in the landscape of memory. "I got a full ride to Kent State. Majored in linguistics. Was halfway through my master's when my mother got sick. Cancer. Aggressive. I came home to take care of her. She was everything to me. Then my dad, he passed from a stroke 6 months later. Just like that. Everything fell apart after that." Her voice didn't waver, but the air in the room seemed to thicken with unspoken grief. She tilted her head slightly, as if rewinding the memories before she spoke them. "I had a baby. No money. No partner who stuck around. Just me and my daughter. So I worked whatever I could find. Grocery stores, nursing homes, temp jobs. Anything to keep a roof over our heads. Eventually, a custodial supervisor here, a good man, offered me night hours. It let me pick up my daughter from school, pay the light bill. That's how I got here." Kellerman watched her, unblinking, just listening. The silence in the office was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the city. "But the languages," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "I didn't stop learning. It was the one thing I had. The one thing that felt like me. I borrowed textbooks from the public library, listened to old recordings, read newspapers in 5 different tongues just to stay sharp. It's what I do. It's the only thing I do that makes me feel like I still matter." Her voice was plain, unadorned, devoid of self-pity or theatricality. "Most people never asked," she added, a quiet observation, not an accusation. "They saw the uniform and assumed." That last word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Assumed. Kellerman sat back in his chair, the weight of her story settling into his chest like a stone. She cleared her throat. "Look, Mr. Kellerman, I'm not saying this to make anyone feel bad. I'm not bitter. Life happened. I did what I had to do. I still do. But you asked, and that's the answer. He exhaled slowly. Denise Atwater was brilliant. That much was obvious now. But she wasn't asking for pity or even a handout. She was giving the truth. Clean, clear, and a little heartbreaking. You ever think about doing anything else? He asked, his voice softer than before. She gave a small shrug. Sometimes. But it's hard to dream when your rent's due. Silence fell again, but it was different now. Denser, full of something unspoken but powerful. Kellerman reached for his leather-bound notebook, uncapped his pen, and jotted down a few lines. What are you writing? She asked, her voice still calm, but a little curious now. He looked up at her, a glint in his eye. Ideas. But one idea in particular is already forming in my head, and it isn't small. The conversation stuck with him all day, a persistent echo even during budget reviews, investor calls, and vendor negotiations. Jonathan Kellerman's mind kept circling back to that morning. To Denise Atwater. Her calm voice, the quiet dignity with which she'd listed 9 languages like they were nothing. That kind of fluency didn't just happen. It took years of discipline, insatiable curiosity, and a profound intellectual hunger. Around 3:45 p.m. he left the executive floor and rode the elevator down, not to the lobby but to the building's service level. He wanted to see something for himself. Down there, the air was warmer, smelling faintly of cleaning solutions and stale coffee. The walls were off-white, scuffed from years of carts and boots. He passed by maintenance crews, break rooms filled with worn furniture, stacks of bottled water, and finally reached the janitorial supply room. He spotted Denise through the open door, her back to him, restocking microfiber cloths on a metal shelf. She moved with the same quiet efficiency he'd observed earlier. Mind if I bother you again? He asked, stepping inside the doorway. She turned, slightly startled, her eyes widening for a brief moment before settling back into their usual composure. You came down here? He smiled. Couldn't stop thinking about our talk. Listen, I have a favor to ask. She wiped her hands on her shirt, a practical gesture. What kind of favor? There's a meeting upstairs. A group from our Sao Paulo office came in early and our translator canceled last minute. A family emergency. It's a critical negotiation. Can you help? She hesitated for only a second, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Portuguese? Yes. Yes, I can do that. Minutes later, they were in conference room 4C. For Brazilian executives sat awkwardly, checking their phones, clearly frustrated by the communication barrier. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Denise stepped in quietly, nodded to Kellerman, and then, without fanfare, began speaking in smooth, confident Portuguese. Kellerman watched as the entire room shifted. Shoulders relaxed. Forced smiles turned genuine. Eye contact sharpened. She wasn't just translating words, she was bridging a chasm, making people feel seen, heard, and respected. When one of the visitors cracked a joke in Portuguese, Denise responded with a laugh and a return quip that had them all chuckling, the tension dissolving like sugar in hot tea. Kellerman didn't understand a word, but he understood connection. He understood trust being forged in real time. After 20 minutes, the meeting wrapped up. One of the Brazilian executives, a stern-faced woman named Isabella, turned to Kellerman and said in surprisingly clear English, "She's better than anyone we've worked with this year. Flawless. Where did you find her?" Kellerman looked at Denise, who was already quietly stacking empty cups on a tray, her movements still those of a cleaning crew member. Right here, he said, a quiet pride in his voice. Back in the hallway, he caught up with her. You ever do professional translation before? She shook her head. Just helped folks out in hospitals, government offices, things like that. Informal. No certificates, no time for school. My daughter needed me more. Kellerman nodded. And where is she now? She's 26. A nurse in Tempe. Paid for school herself. Stubborn like her mama. They both smiled, and for a second it didn't feel like CEO and janitor. Just two people talking about life, about sacrifice, about the quiet triumphs that often went unnoticed. They returned to the service level where Denise clocked back in. She had 2 more floors to clean before shift change. But before she left, she said something that stuck with him, a simple sentence that carried profound weight. I didn't do anything special today. He looked at her, eyebrows raised. That's not how it looked to me. She gave him a small, knowing smile and walked off, disappearing back into the hum of her routine. That night, Kellerman sat in his car for a long time before driving home. He thought about everything. The relentless pressure to grow the company, the endless investor meetings, the constant discussions on diversity and untapped talent. All this time, they'd been looking outside, recruiting globally, searching for new blood, for that elusive edge. But sometimes the gold was already in your backyard, quietly polishing the floors. And once you realized that, the real question became, what were you going to do about it? The next morning, Denise's badge beeped at the wrong time. She had just finished wiping down the East Lobby's glass panels when her supervisor, Ron, a portly man with a perpetually tired expression, tapped her on the shoulder. His look wasn't exactly annoyed, but it wasn't normal either. "Hey, Denise," Ron mumbled, adjusting his cap. "Mr. Kellerman asked to see you again. Upstairs." She blinked, her hand still holding a damp cloth. "Did I do something wrong?" Ron shook his head. "He didn't say. Just told me to send you up. Soon as you're done here." She cleaned her hands on a towel, her mind racing. What could he possibly want? She followed the same path she'd taken the day before, but this time something felt different. Everyone in the building seemed to notice her. People she passed looked up from their phones, their desks. Some whispered. One of the receptionists even gave her a polite, almost conspiratorial smile like she knew something Denise didn't. The air was thick with unspoken curiosity. When she walked into the executive suite, Kellerman stood near the panoramic window, sipping black coffee and staring out at the sprawling Fort Worth skyline. "Come in," he said, not turning around yet, his voice calm. She stood quietly by the door, her hands clasped in front of her, until he faced her. "I've been thinking," he said, placing his mug on a coaster with a soft click. "About talent waste. How many people never get a shot? Not because they're not good enough, but because nobody looks twice. Because they don't fit the mold. Because they're in the wrong uniform." Denise said nothing. She didn't trust easy praise. She'd seen too many people talk big and do little. "I want to create a new position," he continued, his gaze steady on hers. "One that didn't exist before. Something this company badly needs, even if we didn't know it." Now she furrowed her brow, a hint of suspicion in her eyes. "For what?" "Cultural Liaison for International Affairs. Someone who can speak the languages, read between the lines, handle visitors, vendors, documents, all the global touch points that we're constantly fumbling through. Someone who understands more than just the words but the people behind them." He paused, taking a slow breath. "You're qualified, Denise. Probably more than most of the people in our leadership team, honestly. And you've already proved you can handle it with grace, patience, and brains." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The words hung in the air, impossible, exhilarating, terrifying. "This real?" she managed to ask, her voice a little hoarse. "As real as it gets. I don't have a college degree." The words were out before she could stop them, a lifetime of societal conditioning speaking for her. He dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "You have something better. Lived experience, unwavering commitment, and fluency in 9 languages. You think I care about a piece of paper?" She shifted her weight, still unsure, still waiting for the catch. "Why me?" He looked directly at her, his eyes piercing. "Because I watched you solve 3 problems in 3 languages before 9 a.m. yesterday. And because I'm tired of walking past people like you. People doing twice the work for half the credit. People with immense potential who are hidden in plain sight." Denise crossed her arms, a defensive posture. "You know what people are going to say." "I don't care," Kellerman stated simply. She stared at him for a long moment, then let out a slow, measured breath. The weight of years, of struggles, of quiet dreams seemed to lift slightly from her shoulders. "I've never had an office job," she said, her voice softer. "Never had a title. You'll learn fast. I don't have a wardrobe for this kind of thing." A dry chuckle escaped her lips. "I'll have HR send a clothing stipend." "You thought of everything, huh?" "I'm trying." A long pause stretched between them, filled with the unspoken gravity of the moment. Then Denise asked softly, her voice barely a whisper, "What about my shift downstairs? Who replaces me?" Kellerman smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "We'll find someone, Denise. But no one can replace you." For a long time, neither of them spoke. She looked down at her hands, then back at him, her eyes glistening. "You sure this isn't some kind of favor?" He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "This is overdue recognition." She bit her lip, blinking the tears away before they could fall. The years of quiet struggle, the sacrifices, the invisibility, it all coalesced into the single, impossible moment. "All right, then," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "Let's see what I can do." He extended his hand across the desk. She met his gaze, then shook it. It wasn't just a handshake. It was history being rewritten right there in that glass-walled office. But what neither of them fully expected was how everyone else in the building would react. By Wednesday, the news had traveled faster than the elevators. Denise Atwater, the janitor from the night shift, had been promoted to an executive-level position. Nobody knew the full story, just whispers. That she spoke a bunch of languages. That the CEO himself had chosen her. That she might have some kind of secret background, maybe government work, maybe even undercover intelligence. The gossip bounced from cubicle to conference room, mutating with each retelling. Some folks were genuinely curious, their faces alight with a rare spark of wonder. Others smiled, saying, "Good for her," with varying degrees of sincerity. But not everyone was clapping. In the staff lounge, two marketing assistants leaned close over their salads, their voices hushed. "I'm just saying," one whispered, adjusting her designer glasses. "I have a master's in international business from a top-tier university, and I've been waiting 2 years for a promotion." This lady was scrubbing urinals last week. Her friend shrugged, picking at a piece of lettuce. "Maybe she knows something we don't. Or someone." "Oh, please. It's Kellerman trying to look progressive. Check a diversity box. It's a stunt." That same energy trickled into boardrooms and Slack messages. Quiet resentment mixed with confusion. People weren't used to upward moves coming from outside the usual, carefully constructed corporate ladder. Denise felt it the second she stepped into her new office on the 12th floor. It was modest, just a desk, a small potted plant, and a computer she hadn't touched yet. But to her, it looked like another planet. A world she had only ever seen from a distance, through the gleaming glass. When HR finished onboarding her, she asked if she could keep the burgundy night uniform. "Not to wear," she clarified, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Just to remind myself." That afternoon, she met with Victor Sterling, the head of international operations, a man notorious for his rigid adherence to protocol and his cutting remarks. He walked in with a clipboard clutched to his chest, his eyes tight, his jaw set. He didn't shake her hand. He didn't sit. "So, you're the new liaison," he said, his tone flat, like it was a joke wrapped in politeness. Denise looked up from her computer, her expression calm. "That's what I'm told. You have experience in corporate environments?" His question was dripping with skepticism. She smiled faintly. "Only from the outside looking in." He didn't laugh. "I've got reports from Italy, contracts from our Dubai partners, and an entire vendor issue in Sao Paulo that's been dragging on for weeks. Think you can manage that?" He dropped the thick folder onto her desk with a thud, scattering papers. She stood up, meeting his gaze evenly. "I'll need a few hours to review, but yes, I can manage it." Victor gave a curt nod and walked out, the silence he left behind heavier than the folder. Later that night, Kellerman stopped by her office. "How's day one?" She exhaled, leaning back in her chair, a weary but determined sigh. "I've had worse." He smiled. "Victor give you a hard time?" "He doesn't scare me." "I figured." She paused, then added, "But can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why now?" "Why me? You could have just given me a bonus and kept moving." He leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed. "Because I saw myself in you." She raised an eyebrow, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "You were a janitor?" "No," he chuckled softly. "But I was overlooked a lot. I came from nothing. My dad fixed cars in a town no one visits. I worked 3 jobs through college just to pay tuition. People thought I didn't belong in rooms like this." Denise nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "Now you're the one deciding who gets in." He nodded back. "Exactly." There was a beat of silence before Denise looked down at the file on her desk. "I'll be honest," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm nervous." "Good. Means you care." She looked up again, her gaze direct. "There's going to be people who hate this. They'll get over it or they won't. Either way, we're moving forward." Kellerman stood straight, his posture radiating quiet authority. "You have a story, Denise. A real one. And now you've got a platform." Then he turned to leave. As the door clicked softly behind him, Denise looked around her office. She remembered the years she'd cried in bathroom stalls during lunch breaks, the nights she came home with aching feet and barely enough energy to heat up soup for her daughter. The birthdays she missed, the school plays she couldn't attend, the promotions she watched go to people who never even said good morning to the cleaning staff. She opened her desk drawer and placed the old janitor's badge inside, not to forget, but to remember exactly what it took to get here. But this story wasn't just hers anymore, and the spotlight was about to grow much brighter. By the end of the week, Denise's nameplate was mounted outside her office. Black letters on brushed steel, Denise Atwater, Cultural Liaison, International Affairs. It looked official, clean, permanent. Word had gotten out formally this time. The company-wide email hit inboxes Friday morning, sent by Kellerman himself. It was short, clear, and carried weight. He explained her new role, her exceptional background, and more importantly, her undeniable value to the company. He didn't frame it as charity or a feel-good gesture. He made it clear she was the best person for the job. Period. But that didn't stop the noise. Some managers grumbled under their breath, their resentment simmering just below the surface. Others softened once they saw her in action. She navigated conversations with foreign clients better than the most expensive translation software. She corrected mistranslations in old contracts that had cost the company money for years, quietly saving them millions. And she never showed off. She just worked quietly, smoothly, better than anyone had expected. On Monday, Denise was asked to join a critical meeting with a delegation from Morocco. The company's North African expansion had been stuck for months over what seemed like endless miscommunication and deep-seated mistrust. She walked into the room in a soft beige blazer, her posture confident yet approachable. She sat at the long table, introduced herself, and then, to the stunned surprise of many, continued in fluent Moroccan Arabic, a dialect rarely heard in corporate settings. The room changed. You could feel it, the subtle but profound shift. The Moroccan delegates, who had been stiff and reserved, leaned in. Their expressions softened. They listened, truly listened, because when someone speaks your language, not just the words but the heart of your culture, you don't just hear sounds, you hear respect. You hear kinship. After the meeting, one of the Moroccan partners, a distinguished gentleman with kind eyes, approached her privately. He touched his chest gently, a traditional sign of profound gratitude. "No one's ever done that for us," he said in halting English, his voice thick with emotion. "Not in our language. Not like that. You understand." Denise nodded, a quiet strength in her gaze. "You matter. That's all." By midweek, Kellerman made another quiet, yet powerful, move. He renamed the company's main training room, the very space where all new hires gathered for orientation and where mid-level leaders held workshops. The old, generic plaque outside the door was taken down. In its place, a new one was mounted, simple and elegant, the Atwater Room. No big announcement, no fanfare, no party. Just a quiet sign and a shift that meant more than flowers or cake ever could. It was a statement. Later that afternoon, Kellerman stood outside the room, watching as a new group of interns filed in, their faces a mix of nervousness and excitement. He heard one of them whisper, "Who's Atwater?" A senior staff member, a woman who had initially been skeptical of Denise's promotion, answered with a newfound reverence in her voice. "She's someone who reminded this place that greatness doesn't always come in a suit. Sometimes it comes from where you least expect it." That same day, Denise found a sealed envelope on her desk. No return address, just her name handwritten in block letters. Inside was a note, simple and profound. It read, "I used to think I'd be invisible forever. But today I stood a little taller because of you. Thank you." No signature, just proof that people were watching, people who needed to see what was possible. Denise sat there staring at the words, her throat tightening. She didn't cry. She didn't need to, because that was the moment she realized this wasn't just a job. It was a door. But not every door stays open without a fight. And someone was already planning to push back. The backlash didn't take long to show its face. Late Thursday, Denise was called into a meeting, not by Kellerman, but by someone higher up the corporate food chain. Eleanor Craig, a formidable senior board member who'd flown in from Dallas specifically for this. She'd been with the company since the 90s. Sharp suits, sharper tongue, and a reputation for upholding tradition with an iron fist. Denise walked into the small, sterile conference room on the 17th floor. Eleanor waited, a stack of papers meticulously arranged on the table before her, her gaze flat, unyielding. "Have a seat, Miss Atwater," she said without looking up, her voice clipped. Denise sat. Eleanor tapped her pen twice on the table, a deliberate, rhythmic sound. "So, Miss Atwater, I've reviewed your file. You have no college degree, no previous corporate training, and no management certifications." Denise didn't flinch. "That's correct." Eleanor folded her hands, her eyes finally rising to meet Denise's. "You were a janitor here 3 weeks ago." "I was." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a subtle challenge in her posture. "Help me understand how someone with your background is now handling high-level international affairs for a company of this stature." Denise held her gaze, her voice calm, devoid of defensiveness. "Because I speak the languages. I understand the cultures. I've already fixed 2 vendor contracts that were costing us hundreds of thousands, and I cleared a 3-month delay in our Morocco deal. I also helped secure a verbal agreement with our Brazilian partners that legal is finalizing next week, an agreement that was dead in the water before I stepped in." Eleanor pursed her lips, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "You think this company should be run on instinct and charm, Miss Atwater?" Denise smiled slightly, a genuine, unforced smile. "No, ma'am. I think it should be run on results." Eleanor blinked. That was the first time Denise had seen her hesitate, even for a fraction of a second. "I don't need to be liked," Denise added, her voice gaining a quiet power. "But I do need to be useful. And I am." Eleanor stood, slowly, deliberately closing the folder on the table. "You're a gamble, Miss Atwater." "I'm used to that," Denise said quietly. My entire life's been one. When the meeting ended, Denise didn't return to her office right away. She walked out of the building and sat on a cold stone bench across the street, staring at the glass tower she now worked in. So many years she had walked past that building, wearing the same uniform, pushing her cart, carrying cleaning supplies, wondering if anyone ever saw her beyond the burgundy fabric. Now they all did, and some, like Eleanor Craig, clearly didn't like it. She pulled out her phone and called her daughter. "Hey, Ma," her daughter answered, her voice bright. "Everything okay?" Denise hesitated, then nodded to herself, a quiet reassurance. "Yeah, baby. Everything's fine. Just needed to hear your voice." "You sure?" "I'm sure." They talked for a few minutes, mostly about nothing in particular. Groceries, her daughter's rescue dog, a new movie she wanted to watch. But just hearing her daughter's laugh, the simple, uncomplicated joy in her voice, steadied Denise. After they hung up, she sat in silence for a moment longer, gathering her strength. Then she stood up, walked back across the street, and rode the elevator to her floor, head held high. By the next morning, word of the Eleanor Craig meeting had somehow spread throughout the company, distorted and exaggerated in the retelling. And to everyone's surprise, Denise didn't back down. She showed up early, spoke at a team meeting with quiet confidence, took a complex call with the German office without needing a translator, calm, sharp, unbothered. That same day, a handwritten note appeared on the whiteboard outside her office. "We see you." No name, just 3 words that meant the world. In the following weeks, something strange happened. People started coming to her, not just for translation, but for advice, for guidance, for a quiet boost of confidence. She became the person people went to before they pitched an idea to senior leadership. She'd sit with nervous interns and give them tips before big presentations, and she never, ever talked down to anyone. She remembered the feeling of being small, of being dismissed. One afternoon, a shy Vietnamese intern named Bao approached her, his eyes wide with admiration. "How did you learn all those languages, Miss Atwater?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "1 word at a time, Bao. Same way you will." Denise wasn't just doing her job. She was changing the culture. One afternoon, Kellerman joined her for coffee in the break room, the familiar scent of brewing beans filling the air. "Been hearing good things," he said, leaning against the counter. She sipped from her cup. "Been trying to ignore the bad ones." "You're making waves, Denise." She looked at him, a question in her eyes. "That a good thing?" He smiled. "Around here? It means you're doing something right." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the coffee machine filling the void. "You know," he added, his voice thoughtful, "I've been thinking about starting a training program for internal talent, especially folks working non-desk roles. There are probably more Denises in this building, hidden just like you were." She nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "There are. They just haven't been seen yet." He looked at her, his gaze direct. "Want to help me build it?" She smiled, a slow, determined smile. "Already started in my head." By month's end, the pilot program launched. A new initiative called Voice Inside, designed to give workers across departments access to language training, leadership mentoring, and visibility across divisions. It was Denise's idea, born from her own journey, and it caught fire. It became a beacon, proving that talent truly had no dress code. Eventually, she was invited to speak at a major logistics leadership summit in Cincinnati. She stood on a brightly lit stage, a spotlight illuminating her, and told her story. Not as a motivational tale, but as a reality check for the thousands of executives and managers in the room. "I was never just a janitor," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the vast convention hall. "I was fluent. I was capable. I was ready. But nobody ever looked long enough to see it. So the next time you pass someone without a title, someone in a uniform, someone on the periphery, ask yourself, what are you really missing?" The room was silent for a beat, a collective intake of breath. And then it erupted. A standing ovation, a thunderous wave of applause that lasted for minutes. On her way out, a young man with tears in his eyes approached her, clutching a worn notebook. "My mom's a housekeeper," he said, his voice trembling, "and she speaks 5 languages. I used to be embarrassed to say that." Denise touched his arm, her eyes soft. "Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from. The only thing to be ashamed of is staying blind to brilliance." She walked out of that building taller than she ever had in her life. Not because of the applause, not because of the promotion, but because she hadn't changed who she was to fit the role. She'd brought herself, every layer of her story, every quiet struggle, every hard-won skill, with her. And that made all the difference. Never assume you know someone's worth based on what they wear, where they work, or what their resume says. Talent has no dress code. Intelligence doesn't need permission. And brilliance can walk past you wearing a name tag, holding a mop. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or ignored, keep going. The right person will see you. And when they do, don't be afraid to take that seat at the table. Better yet, bring a few more chairs with you.